Greetings and welcome back to yet another episode of the Daily Run, and today we're playing as Lazarus. One thing that Afterbirth Plus added in large quantities, or I would say every DLC, is that new champion variants or just new boss variants or any variants of enemies which already existed before. And generally I'm a big fan of that because I think adding new variants, maybe a new attack to an enemy which we already know, gives it a bit more depth, and then maybe with bosses especially, you have a favorite variant of a boss and sometimes you're very happy to see one, and maybe there's like a more difficult variant of a particular boss. I think that these rewards could be tweaked, so if you're facing a harder version of a boss, you could get a potentially better payout than as opposed to if you're facing an easier variant. That isn't in the game, but still I'm happy that these small changes do exist, that for example, not every single boss fight is exactly the same, even if you have enemies or bosses which essentially reflect that. But champion version of Ragman is something that nobody really wanted, or at least it makes sense that it would exist in the game just because every other boss, or at least most other bosses, have their champion variants. But this particular one is just nasty. The fact that it spawns spiders, and if you have no DPS it appears on the first floor, and usually you won't get any damage up items, it means that you can't really dispose of the spiders fast enough because this particular variant only has two attacks. Either he spawns a new spider by rolling his head, or he spawns a new spider by healing himself and then spawning a spider. I honestly don't know which one is worse because most often than not, you're not really gonna deal enough damage to the head to actually kill it unless your aim is really good, and most of the time I would say that just because of how the head bounces around, it's impossible to do so. The thing is, I think that this could be amended to some extent. I think this particular variant of Ragman, the spiders that it spawns should have less HP than the regular version. I think that would make it much more fair, or at least what they could have done is make the head attack a bit more likely, and then you can actually focus the head and maybe the respawn attack would be a bit less likely. In the particular fight I had, most of the attacks that hit were the respawn animations where he heals himself and then spawns a spider or two. And that's so unfortunate because you're essentially stuck on the floor that's supposed to take like a minute or maybe 2 minutes at most. You basically fight the boss for twice of that duration just because you happen to encounter that particular variant, which is a bit unlucky, but hey, what can you do? You know, I still feel like Isaac is a game that definitely went in the direction where it's designed that you're really not supposed to win every run. And I think that Edmund, as the designer, looked at the game and he thought, you know, this variance is what people enjoyed. And I don't blame him. We definitely, I think a lot of people, or at least I'm speaking for a lot of people when I say that we do enjoy variance in Isaac. It's exciting when you actually get a super good run, and it's exciting when you can actually pull a bad run out of the clutch and just win one. But the fact is that especially with the DLCs and all of these changes, I definitely think that maybe the overall balance of the game has suffered a little bit. I definitely think that some items maybe appear a bit too often, something like Plan C. I just feel like I see it all the time. I understand why it's there. It's supposed to maybe dilute the item pools just a little bit, because I think it's almost in every item pool, and it's obviously an item that you usually wouldn't pick up. It's just straight up a bad item. But I think that there could be more elegant solutions to that. I'm not really sure why it shows up so often. Maybe something's broken in the game or whatever. But maybe another thing that I would like to point out is definitely the difficulty curve. I think that's something that the Flash version, or at least from what I remember, I haven't played it in a long time, and Rebirth had a very good grasp on. The fact is, you know that the first two floors were the easiest floors of the game, and when you enter the caves 1 or the 3rd or the 4th floor, they were harder, but they weren't super or a lot harder. I do remember that the biggest problem that we had back in the day were the grid heads, and the grid heads just had a lot of HP. They were super annoying to deal with, and I thought, you know, it can't get worse. The fact is obviously that there were much less rooms than there are now, and those grid heads were just much more likely, and that was maybe the state of the game back then. But now, I just feel like with every expansion, there are enemies which have more HP, which are just more annoying to deal with. And to be honest, when I see grid heads now, at least I'm kinda excited to see them, because I know that these enemies maybe don't disappear, they don't go invisible, they don't have really any particular weak spots, but you know you can abuse them. If you just stand still, they can't actually hit you. And I feel like they were a tough enemy, or at least a healthy enemy with a lot of HP, which was designed well. Their attacks were telegraphed, they weren't very likely to hit you. Sure, some rooms were maybe a bit annoying, where there were 4 of them and there were a lot of gaps, but it was a nice steady progression. They were definitely on the maybe stronger side of the spectrum when you actually enter the 3rd or the 4th floor. But what Afterbirth and Afterbirth Plus especially have done is added a lot of new enemies to the game, which are not only bulkier and obviously have much more champion variants, they just take longer and a lot of room variations, so all the portals, all of the drown charges, all of these enemies which just have a lot of HP, and not just a lot of HP, you would think that that's already hard enough, but with drown chargers especially, or maybe even better, the molly booms which spawn the drown chargers. Those rooms are one of the worst, just because they already have so much HP, the drown chargers have so much HP, and even when you kill them, you still have to be careful on where you're standing. There's nothing worse than walking into a room seeing like a ton of boom flies and some of the chargers. Your fly maybe flies off into the boom fly, it explodes, and then just a million tears appear on the screen, and you can't really dodge anywhere. And I don't really, I mean, how can I put this? I don't agree with the decision. I like the enemy, don't get me wrong. I really enjoyed fighting drown chargers when I'm actually strong enough, and especially combined with the flies which explode in horizontal directions and then the chargers explode in diagonal directions. I think that's a very nice change, or at least you have to be very aware of where you're standing in that particular situation if you want to dodge the damage. But with how this game is structured, the fact that you really, or at least just because of how the item pools got diluted, most often than not, you're not gonna get a DPS upgrade on the first or the second floor. On the third floor, you can already face a room which has like 4 or even more, even like 10 chargers, and it's just impossible to deal with. And I definitely think this particular scaling or progression, I think definitely a bit of it is just probably because the overall player base has gotten better, and they did try to increase the difficulty by just increasing more enemies which do more damage, which are healthier, which have more maybe harder to dodge attack patterns, but all in all, I still feel like even though we got better as a community, it doesn't mean that even though you can maybe tackle those rooms without getting hit, I would still call them not unfair, but I would just say tedious. I think that's the best way to describe a lot of these changes, which just add some artificial difficulty. A lot of people like to point it out. I wouldn't call this artificial difficulty. I definitely think there's some merit in increasing health and giving more health to enemies, but I do think that if you do that, there should be maybe a compensation or maybe a different type of negative drawback that those enemies have. So you shouldn't have enemies which are super fast, which deal a lot of damage and then maybe explode in tears at the same time. So all of those things together do make for some quite tedious gameplay, and I'm definitely it's more pronounced in some runs than in others, and I guess, like I said, that was the point. The point was that dailies, or at least runs in general, some runs are just difficult to deal with, you just kind of have to survive through the bullshit, and some runs are just very pleasant and nice to actually fight through. What's really funny about this run, even though it had a lot of these maybe hard rooms, or maybe difficult rooms, or tedious rooms, however you want to call them, even though it had a lot of those, I struggled a lot until I got to the third floor, and I did get all of the devil deals up until that point, and because of that I got Guppy. My game experience from that point changed immediately. I suddenly had a very fun run, and suddenly I went from kind of struggling to survive to this position where I had enough HP, but I was kind of more worried about where my flies are gonna hit. So suddenly, you know, the whole game experience changed from me trying to survive and just being in this tedious position with no damage, to me trying to actually dodge and correct and plan where I'm actually going to stand when I kill an enemy so I don't get hit. And I definitely think that's a much healthier approach to the game. I just, like I said, I think the overall problem here is that the enemies don't scale proportionally to how well you scale. And obviously you can't do that with every single floor, but I definitely think that some enemies could be moved maybe at least from the third floor to the fourth floor, if not from the third floor to the fifth floor. There are also some enemies which appear later on which are easier, which should be easier, or at least I think should appear earlier on. I don't have any of them directly from my head, but I definitely think that some of them do exist. But obviously the discrepancy that there are more hard enemies early on is much more noticeable, just because you can't deal with them. And even if there are easy enemies later on, you can still dispatch with them even if you have a weak run, just because they're obviously easy. All in all, just because we did survive through those first 3 layers of hell with the I'm Excited pill, with the champion Ragman, with all of the drown chargers, we did finish in a very comfortable spot, thanks to Guppy. I think I didn't get hit. I think maybe I got hit once on the Hush fight, but from the rest I didn't get hit. So my damage penalty wasn't that bad, even though Ragman did manage to hit me like 5 times. And our overall score and time rank are actually very good. My time ranks have been kind of improving steadily at the 99th. I usually finish in like the top 1000, but now I finish at the top 100. So you never know, maybe I'm going for time ranks as well, although that was never my intention. But definitely the Guppy transformation there helped. I would imagine that a lot of people didn't even find Guppy, just because The fistula fight is also annoying, and it's one of those which just spawns more enemies. It's manageable at least, so I would say that it's maybe a bit more skill reliant, but I can see that you can very easily get hit there, and if you don't have any spirit hearts, you lose the devil deal, and because of that you really can get the guppy dream in that situation. Still, I did enjoy this run after the 3rd floor. Up until the 3rd floor it was kind of a drag, so if you want to maybe experience Afterbirth Plus, and you kind of want to summarize how it goes with just one run, I definitely think this one is it. And if you didn't play the daily, I definitely encourage you to play this one yourself, because I think in some sense it's a fun experience, it's a fun challenge, but maybe in some other senses it's just a showcase of how broken the game can be sometimes. I hope you enjoyed this one, guys, and I hope to see you next time.